Hello everybody, and the story today is Hansel and Gretel, a tale from the Brothers Grimm.
Or even Gretel and Hansel. Gretel and her older brother Hansel lived with their father, a poor woodcutter, and their stepmother, an unkind woman who didn't like children. "Winter is coming and we don't have enough food," the stepmother said to her husband one night when Gretel and Hansel were in bed. "Those children of yours eat too much. We must take them into the forest and leave them there." "We can't do that," said the children's father. "Don't be a fool," their stepmother said. "If we don't, we will all starve." Upstairs, too hungry to sleep, Gretel listened to every word. She woke Hansel and told him what she'd heard. "If they leave us in the forest," Gretel said, "we must try to find our way home again." Hansel had an idea that he whispered to his sister. Gretel nodded. As soon as their father and stepmother were asleep, Hansel crept out of the house and filled his pockets with smooth white pebbles. Then he went back to bed. The next day, Gretel and Hansel's stepmother led them out of the house. "We're all going into the forest to chop wood," she said. Gretel ran ahead to distract her father and stepmother. She asked all sorts of questions about the animals and plants in the forest, while Hansel walked behind, dropping pebbles on the ground as he went. Eventually, they all stopped in a clearing, and the children's father made a fire. "Wait here and keep warm while your stepmother and I go and chop wood," he said sadly, and he gave his children a big hug. Gretel and Hansel nodded, but they knew their father and stepmother would not return. They waited until dark, then they followed Hansel's trail of white stones which gleamed in the moonlight all the way back home. The woodcutter was overjoyed to see his children, but his wife was very angry. "Get to bed," she shouted, and slammed the door behind them. It wasn't long before Gretel and Hansel's stepmother again started plotting to get rid of them. "We'll have to take them deeper into the wood tomorrow," she told their father, "so it will be impossible for them to find their way back." The children overheard their stepmother's wicked plan. "You need to collect more pebbles," Gretel said to Hansel, determined not to be lost in the woods. But when Hansel tried to sneak out like he had before, he found that his stepmother had locked the door. "Don't worry," said Gretel, "we'll think of something else." The next day the children's father gave them some dry old bread to eat. Hansel kept his piece and dropped crumbs from it as they walked through the forest. They went much further this time. Then, just as before, Gretel and Hansel's father and stepmother left them behind. When it got dark, the children looked for the trail of breadcrumbs in the moonlight, but the crumbs had gone. The birds had eaten them all. All night and all the next day the children wandered through the forest, getting more and more lost and very, very hungry. They were about to give up when a white bird flew down and fluttered ahead of them. It led them to a strange little cottage. "Look, Gretel," cried Hansel, running over. "This house is made of gingerbread and cake and marzipan." Both children began nibbling on pieces of the delicious cottage when the front door opened. An old woman came out and peered at them through thick glasses. "You children look very hungry," she said, smiling kindly. "Come into my house and have some supper." Inside the gingerbread cottage, the dining table was covered with delicious food and drink, such as Gretel and Hansel had only ever dreamed of before. Once they had eaten and drunk as much as they could, the old woman let them sleep on the most comfortable beds they had ever seen. "This is wonderful," said Hansel, snuggling down. Gretel wasn't so sure. How would they ever repay the kind old woman? But before she could worry too much, she fell into a deep sleep. Early the next morning, the old woman came in and pulled Hansel from his bed. She was angry. "You children belong to me now," she hissed. "Stop, you witch!" cried Gretel. "You're hurting him." The old woman ignored her and locked Hansel in a cage. "You, girl, must cook for your brother until he is fat enough for me to eat," she cackled. So every day Gretel cooked and slaved, and every day the witch, who was half blind, pinched Hansel's finger to see how fat he was getting. Gretel was a clever girl. One day she waited until the old woman was asleep. Then she gave Hansel a chicken bone to poke out of the cage instead of his finger. "This will fool the witch into thinking you aren't getting any fatter," she whispered. The old woman would pinch Hansel's finger, but no matter how long she waited, it always seemed to stay thin and bony. Finally, the witch lost patience. "I'll eat the boy now anyway," she shouted at Gretel. "Go and check the oven's hot enough." Gretel went over to the oven. She didn't know what to do. How could she save her brother from being eaten? Suddenly she had a bright idea. "I don't know how to check the oven," she said slyly. "Can you show me?" "You stupid child," said the old woman as she pushed Gretel away and leant inside the oven. Quick as a flash, Gretel bundled the witch into the flames and slammed the door. Then she broke open Hansel's cage with a poker. The two children hugged each other tightly. "Can you reach that pot up on the high shelf, Hansel?" Gretel asked. "I saw the witch put gold and precious stones inside it." Hansel grabbed the pot. Inside, many jewels, coins and other riches sparkled. "Quick, Gretel, let's try to find our way back to father." The children packed up some food and raced away through the forest. Eventually they found their way home. Their father hugged them tightly. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I should never have left you in the forest." Then he told them their nasty stepmother had died. "We forgive you, father," the children said. Hansel told their father all about the gingerbread cottage and how brave Gretel had saved them both from the scary witch. Gretel emptied out the pot. "Look, father," she said, as the jewels and gold coins tumbled onto the table. Their father couldn't believe his eyes. Gretel and Hansel were very happy to be home, and thanks to the witch's treasure, they never went hungry again.
Good.
And that's the end. Bye, everyone.